I definitely think that not everybody has somebody at any point in their lives, right? Who is going to raise them, who's going to nurture them, who's going to love them, and who's going to plant good seeds in them, right? And I actually think that there are more kids, especially within the Black community, that are unwanted than we like to address, right? I actually think more kids are abandoned, neglected, and that could just be due to young parents, right? You don't know what you don't know. And when you're young too, you have children, it's kind of about survival. You're also trying to maintain the sense of fun. But the thing about child rearing is that in many cases, it does kind of put a halt on your development, right? So some people are thrusted into the responsibility and they kind of, take it by the horns, and they navigate that and they adapt to the challenges, right? But some people don't. And I think for the people that don't, I think that it can definitely be, resentment and all those things that kind of impact how you show up with your children and what you pour into your children, right? We are living in a day and age, I say this all the time, right? The information that is now so readily available to us was something that was not available in the past. It just wasn't. Before it was kind of like you just were in your community, and that's, you were kind of victim to that, right? If you didn't have the resources or anything like that, then that's pretty much just what it was. Now, I won't say that everyone has had somebody plant a good seed, a teacher or whatever, because I know that's not true. And like I said, I think we're just living in a day and age now where some people are starting to see like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to live like this. I can live differently. And I think that's a very heavy revelation, right? It's a heavy burden to carry, especially when you've already made choices and your life is kind of encumbered by responsibility that doesn't really allow for flexibility, exploration, and that sense of fluidity that will allow you to make better decisions and better your life and your circumstances, which is why I have had conversations with you guys about redefining what is Black excellence, right? And I know a lot of people are starting to talk about this now because we start to realize that not all of us are going to have an opportunity to aspire to be certain things, right? But we can still grow as people, and we can still choose better, and we can still make better decisions. Now, when I talk about certain things and I kind of like give this sort of like tough love, right? I don't think it's about beating up on one another, right? And I know one thing about myself, learning how to be more kind and intentional in my speech, but I also understand that when I'm talking, when I'm creating, I don't really want to sit and expound upon, something, right, to such a degree where I'm going out my way not to offend anybody, right? Because I actually think that so many of us don't really have anybody to tell us the truth, to be honest. And you need people like that in your life, right? I know we're kind of in this age now where everybody is so incredibly sensitive. And so, back in the day, it was kind of like, hey, somebody will tell you the truth, whether it was your grandmother or whatever. And you might have been kind of salty, but it kind of built this sense of internal strength within you to where you can hear criticism or hear the truth about yourself and your situation or your choices, and then be inspired. You might be a little sad, but you can make better choices. Right now, I'm not talking about someone just deliberately beating down on you, punching down on you, right? Verbal abuse to that extent. But I do think that for a lot of people who have just kind of been coddled, and that's just the truth. You don't really know how to accept criticism. You don't know how to accept somebody telling you you're going the wrong way. Right. And we see this all the time with young kids. And it's not just young kids in this generation. That's every young person. Right. I was that young person. Right. Someone to tell you this ain't it. Right. Your mother, your father, your teacher or whatever. Don't be hanging out with them. And what do? You double down. Right. You double down. And so what I was really kind of addressing is that we become adults after making, such choices, and we want someone to feel sorry for us. We want to try to make it like it's this collective grief that we all carry, which, like I said, it's about context. It's about, having certain conversations and discussing certain things within a certain amount of time. And I tell you guys this all the time, certain conversations cannot be had simultaneously, right? We cannot simultaneously talk about the impact of, the crack era and systemic racism and institutional racism and poverty and all these things while in the same breath talking about the lack of agency, right? The lack of choice, right? Those two conversations cannot be had in the same breath, because they would be contradicting, right? And both of them are very, there's a lot of fluency in each of those conversations. So I don't think that we can have those simultaneously. And so I try to be mindful of that, right? So when I say something, I don't really want to have to expound upon, well, at the same time, right, I don't want to tell you, hey, listen, you're going down the wrong path. You're making bad choices, right? You need to get it together, and then turn around and say, well, at the same time, your mother wasn't there and your father wasn't there, and I think any person who has been blessed with the opportunity to have that level of transformation has had someone look them in the eye and say, at what point do you stop this? At what point do you decide, hey, it didn't happen for me, but maybe I can give it to my kids. Maybe I can do something in my life in a positive way, right? And the thing that's so interesting too, and I don't want to reference The Millionaire Next Door, right? But the thing that I think is so interesting, especially as I've learned and I've grown and I've been exposed to different people, is that many of us don't come from much, right? We see people, and we kind of have this obsession today with, society, because influencers and people who come online who do have corporate jobs or who do have this sort of like aesthetic are now polished, right? That work that was done on the back end has already been fulfilled. So we don't actually see people's journeys anymore, and even when we do see the journey, we are still, at the edge of our seats waiting for the transformational pivotal periods where things are glistening in gold. You know what I mean? And so what we fail to realize is that everybody for most African Americans, right, there is no generational wealth. Right? There's resources, there's opportunity, but most importantly, for a lot of people, I got to be honest with you, it's simply discipline. And that's not always just Black people, right? I've spoken with, surgeons who didn't come from money. Their parents were white, they were poor, they were uneducated, dropped out in 4th grade, 6th grade, you know what I mean? And you talk to these surgeons and you're like, how did that happen for you? How did you go off to, Emory and do all these amazing things? And it's like, I just was disciplined. I loved reading, right? Same thing with Bell Hooks. You know what I mean? The oldest of, I don't know, I think Bell Hooks maybe had like 6 or 7 siblings, no, she wasn't from Louisville, Kentucky. Or was she from Louisville, Kentucky? She was from Kentucky, right? And, books was the thing that was most affordable. Same thing for myself, and I think when I look back over my life, I can see certain influence and I can see where I am and why I am the way I am. And I have agency. Right. And that's where the growth comes from. And I think that's also where your self-esteem and your sense of self-confidence can come from as well. Because if you live your life feeling like everything has happened to me, right? I didn't get this, I didn't get that, right? If you don't learn to kind of like process and transform that, right? And get to a point where you're like, hey, at the end of the day, I was here, but I did make those choices. I did want to hang, right, with my friends. There were people who weren't really doing all that great. You know what I mean? I can look back and say I didn't have the discipline to pursue that career path. You know what I mean? I chose to, start dibbling and dabbling in marijuana. I made my choices, right? And I think that's okay. And when I say okay, I'm saying okay in the sense of acceptance, right? When you're young, if you don't really have anyone who kind of encourages you academically, right, to be more disciplined, it's going to be really hard for you to go to college and really do well when you don't have that type of background. Some people do, and some people, they just have that discipline and they got that drive and they know what they want. But some of us get distracted, and that's fair enough. We're young, you know what I mean? And so I don't think the message and what I'm saying about growth and growing up, I don't think it's about condemnation. I think it's about agency. I think it's about understanding what happened to you and why it happened to you, and healing in the sense of, conversation and addressing certain things. But I do think context matters. And I think as you get older, regardless of what happened to you, this isn't just a Black community thing. This is a life thing. You know what I mean? I mean, your spouse may care about you. Your kids are going to care about you. Some of your family members may do their best to care about you, right? Your friends, they I don't know, they come and go, but strangers, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily a lack of kindness. It's the fact that you're an adult and there's agency at this point. Do you see what I'm saying? And so in that agency, I think what I advocate for, or at least what I like to bring insight to in Revelation and try to encourage all of us, right, as African Americans, is to, really start to deprogram ourselves and stop equating excellence, character, right? Black excellence, character, persons of integrity, good people, whatever, with materialism, right? With the accumulation of materialism or, consumerism. And I don't think that that's a burden that Black people have to bear entirely, right? Because it's the American way, but I do think we can start to be maybe a little bit more mindful in how we respect one another. I think at a very foundational level, right? Like, just because someone maybe didn't have a certain type of degree or a certain type of background or whatever, doesn't mean that this person is unworthy, doesn't mean this person is, all these things. And so I think that's where we can kind of start. And I think that actually in practicality looks like no longer overlooking one another. You know what I mean? You can meet somebody who maybe didn't have that certain type of background and maybe doesn't have the most lucrative business, but is an amazing creative. You know what I mean? For photographer or creative, a creative writer, whatever. You know what I mean? So I think when we talk about it like that, that's really what it is in terms of the Black community and how we relate to one another. It's not so much of crabs in a barrel. It's more so our disregard for one another, because we feel like if we don't have something, right, if we're not standing on the top of the world, if we're not overtly successful, right, then you don't have a place and you don't deserve respect or, I don't want to say a seat at the table, but, kind of. You know what I mean? So I think if anything, that looks like engaging with one another as a human being. And I think that looks like lessening the standards that we put on Black peoples more specifically, right? I tell you guys this all the time, white men and women, and I don't want to compare our culture to white people, because we obviously know white supremacy is the thing that allows, right, for the humanity and the full range, right, of the human experience and emotions and shortcomings and all the things, right, within the lives of white Americans. But at the same time, I think that gets to a point where it's like, and so, and we can start to see one another in a different way. Now, I think the problem then is, there is entitlement a little bit, right, embedded in some of these conversations. And I think you have to bring it back to gratitude, and you have to bring it back to humility, right? You have to realize that not everybody gets everything, and you're not entitled to certain spaces just because you feel like you should be in certain spaces. There are some people who've worked hard, right, and who are privy to other rooms and networks and things like that. And, I'm not going to say you're unworthy, right? But we also know that there's hierarchies. We also know that there's, social norms, right? We also know that there are certain, behaviorisms and cultural language, right? Code of conduct to be in certain spaces, and it's not to say that you're inherently unworthy, but I think there is this onus on African American people to simply, especially today, right, obstruct an entire system, right? Like, and that's just not how it works. You know what I mean? So I think if anybody, who's worked hard for something, I think you absolutely would want to have the acknowledgement and the access, right? And so I think we kind of have to, dial it back and be more practical and maybe lessen a little bit on the entitlement, right? That says, if this person has it, I should have it, right? Because that's not realistic. And that's not how life works, right? If you've worked hard for something, if you've sacrificed, if you've been disciplined, you absolutely want to be rewarded for that, And so, again, I'm not going to go into, what it's like to work hard and not get the job, or like, I'm not going to go into that, right? Because the reality is that life doesn't always work out how you expect it to work out, but if you're trying, if you're pressing forward, then hey, it can happen. So sometimes you don't know you're sick until someone tells you that you're sick, or you meet somebody that's healed, right? And that's not for anybody to tear you down, but I do think that sometimes we recognize certain things and then it becomes a thing, right? I think the other thing too is, unfortunately, a lot of mental health resources and just resources in general within the Black community are very inadequate. But I also think at the same time, there are resources that are available that people don't take advantage of, right? If you want something and you're really hungry and like you're really like about it, whether that's your healing, right? Which the reality is that many people don't want healing. I'm not gonna say they don't want healing, but I'm gonna say people don't work as hard for healing like they do for the attainment of materialism, right? I also understand that, yes, we have to survive and we have to take care of ourselves, but I also can be honest and say that people don't work as hard on being a better person like they do in attaining resources. And that's just on average, So healing kind of becomes a thing that I think people kind of fall back on when they realize that maybe, they fell short in terms of external accomplishments, right? And now it's like, oh, I want to work on me and get myself together and change and be a better person. And you lived half your life, right? So, hey, right, it's out there. That's one thing I'll say. It's out there. And, I'm not here to tell you it's too late. That's not here what I'm saying at all. But I'm just saying, I do think that many of us do grow a little too late. Right. And, you can always change. You can always better yourself. Like I said, it's not too late in the sense of, you still got breath in your bones, breath in your body. Do your thing. You know what I mean? But I do think it is unfortunate because I think it has an impact on the quality of life that we live. It has an impact on the community that we can build and that is available to us, right? Like, why does it take for, somebody to live their entire life and, just wilding out, hurting other members within the community, whether that's women, men, children, whatever, to turn it around in their 40s and their 50s. You know what I mean? That's unfortunate. I think that that's a tragedy because it happens far too often, right? Why does it take for a rapper to be, nearly 50 years old to come out and say, man, we was selling the kids bullcrap? You know what I mean? Man, we was impacting the community in a very negative way. You know what I mean? Man, we put this stuff out there that altered the lives of millions of people. Like, why does it take that though? You know what I mean? And it's really just the agency that we don't really want to admit. Sometimes we have to kind of look at ourselves and be like, okay, maybe I'm not the best person. Maybe I'm not a good person like I thought I was. Where did I learn that from? What did I see? Do I think I have to be the biggest, baddest, nastiest, grimiest person to succeed or to make it out here? What is my cultural messaging about my community and about others within my community? You know what I mean? So I think it's unfortunate because I think when people do come out and try to help and have conversations with other individuals within the community about healing, we like to throw this language around of privilege and, we don't want to hear from it. And this is why we never grow, So, a lot of it, I don't want to say it's ego, it could be groupthink. It could be, other insecurities and things like that on the surface. But I do think it gets to a certain point where doors start to close because this is what we kind of do. We don't want to hear from that person. Oh, this person's privileged. Everybody has their own fair share of things you've never seen that them battling with, and just because you feel like if someone shares a part of the story, oh, that wasn't that bad. You don't know the other things that they're carrying. And like I said, when we see the glitter and gold, we don't really resonate, right, with the struggle story. We don't really resonate with all that it took on the back end, until it's too, until it gets, I don't even think we ever really resonate with that, So, yeah, I think the reality is that for many African American people, we're heavily influenced to go into entertainment. Right. And in us going in entertainment, there's exploitation. There's a lot of wasted time. Right. Instead of building skills and like having practicality, right, stability in our lives, we're really encouraged to pursue our dreams. And I was watching Precious the other day. Right. Amazing film. I mean, it was a very sad film, but like overall, the symbolism and just the messaging in Precious was just really profound. And I realized that for many African Americans, young Black children, right, you grow up and you feel like you're nobody. You don't feel special, right? You don't have the long hair like the white girl. You don't have mom and dad in the class at the, coming to school, bringing your lunch. You know what I mean? Regardless of what was going on in people's lives in the back end, right? You just start to feel like you're not special. You start to feel like you're not enough, right? And so these messages about being a celebrity and, entertainment, it becomes a way of escapism. And I saw that in the movie Precious, right? I watched it before, but I never watched it with this kind of like, critical lens, or at least more so observant and, examinatory, right? Or examination. I never looked at it from a, critical type of lens, but yeah. And so I think that's the reality. And I think so many of us, we get so caught up in the pursuit of the dreams because we want to be somebody, we want to be somebody. We don't feel like we are somebody. We don't feel like we're somebody, and like I said, I think what's unfortunate is that you do have some people who want to come back and give to the community, but they're not always received. right? We have conversations and we push them out and we say they're privileged and we say they think that they're better, right? And we say, oh, she just had an easy life. Look at her. She's light skinned, or she's brown skinned, or she has this type of hair, or she looks like this. You know what I mean? Some people just know how to put it together a little bit better. You know what I mean? And the thing is, we these people will sit out and tell you their story and bare their heart to you. And, most people will just flip that anyway. Right. So, that's the reality. Like, if your heart's not in the right place towards people anyway, it's not going to make a difference if I tell you I've been through this or that. You know what I mean? If you're already feeling some kind of way, So there is compassion always, right? There is always compassion. But I also know that there's choices. And like I said, we can't have these conversations simultaneously. If you've been following me for a while, we've had these conversations. We've talked about the compassion we need to have for, single moms who have their kids very young, right? And the lack of exploration, right? And how you kind of stay in that time capsule taking care of your children, and you grow older and maybe you want to kind of revert. And then we have regression, right? We don't talk about that. I mean, we've already talked about that. We talk about the lack of role models for young Black men, but guess what? There's so many Black men out there who aren't doing anything about it. You guys aren't volunteering to go down to the football team. You're not volunteering to start a football team in your community on the summers, just a couple days a week, flag football. You know what I mean? You're not doing anything about it. So it does get to a point where we do have to start talking about agency, right? And I'm at that point now. If you've been listening to me on Renaissance Room, listen, the compassion is padded, listen, the compassion is there. I've been very compassionate, and I am compassionate, right? But I also know I've met people who have had opportunities to build and change their lives, and they just didn't want to do it. They were kind of settled into where they were, and hey, it is what it is. And there's no shame in that. Right. But at the same time, we got to kind of stop with the weaponization of assuming everybody's privileged. Right. Because maybe they speak with confidence, or maybe they're authentic and they're integrated at this point in their life where they realize, hey, listen, I've been through. I've made my choices. I've fallen short. I'm not where I could have probably been had I made better choices. But I'm here. I'm pressing forward. I'm accepting my life. This is my life. You know what I mean? I can't change it. I'm going to accept it. I'm going to do what I can do. And I'm going to put my best foot forward. But yeah, I've made some mistakes. Yeah, I probably could have been further along, but this is my life. I'm not going to hate myself because I don't have. I'm worth more than what I have anyway. If I believe in God, if I have some type of meaning in my life, you know what I mean? I'm waking up every day. Come on. You know what I mean? And maybe I can't go out and do this grand thing with millions of dollars, but maybe I can, share an encouraging word. Maybe I can pour into my children. Maybe I can pour into my wife, or pour into my husband, or pour into my mother, or whatever. You know what I mean? So find your little corner and make do. But I do think we have to kind of get to a point where it's about agency. I didn't like the way I was seeing little girls moved. I started a nonprofit. You know what I mean? But I also know how it is when you show up in certain spaces. And how we can be very hostile towards certain people when we assume they have what we don't have. And so the message isn't received. You know what I mean? Listen, ordinary. That's just what it is. And like I said, the people that have, everybody has shortcomings. Everybody has things that they've gone through. Some people have had certain advantages, yes, but I think we've all had an opportunity. Some people maybe have not had an opportunity, but I think there's more of us who have actually had an opportunity than some of us who have not had an opportunity. You see what I'm saying? And I think ultimately, I feel like, and maybe, I'll say maybe on average, we've all had somebody say, hey, don't go down this path. Don't do this. Don't be like me. Have many of us really had people say, like, you ain't never going to be nothing. You know what I mean? Has that really been the reality? Or is that just how they love to, depict African-American people? Do we not get swept up in the distractions of entertainment culture? We got celebrities in our faces all day long. Gossip in our faces all day long. Designer in our faces all day long. You know what I mean? And I know the education isn't adequate. Like I said, we can have these conversations as well. We can have these conversations as well, but we can also acknowledge the fact that, hey, even when it's in our faces and there are people who are trying to educate, we're not trying to hear that anyway. We looking at you like, oh, you got this, you got that, you come from this, you come from that. You're not hearing it anyway. But you can't get older and be in that age and say, Miss Jalen, she came to my school and she was talking to me, but I wasn't trying to hear that. You know what I mean? Because that's the reality. So now here you are and you're at this age and, you got to grow up and you got to make better choices and you got to, do I said what I said, So the conversations can be had simultaneously. But you will need to get to a point in your life where you start to have agency. You know what I mean? You can do anything you want to do. You hear people talk all the time. I don't want to go to college because I don't want to be in debt. Okay, cool. That's a choice. Right. And so when you make certain choices, like you don't want to go to college and, you're not going to be an entrepreneur, then you know what that means? You're going to be relegated to the workforce. And you know what that means to be relegated to the workforce? That means that you may be doing a job of menial labor. It doesn't mean you're unworthy. It just means that that's what it is. You're probably going to be working harder for less. And it's going to be very little raises. Your life might be harder. It might be smaller. You might not be operating at your full potential, but that's where you are right now. Doesn't mean you're settled. That just means that's where you are right now. You see what I'm saying? We don't really have that many options in terms of being. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes we're so sensitive to all this, like I said, I want to say entertainment and the sensationalism of opportunities within American society. We don't realize that there's really only two ways, right? You're either going to get a job, you're going to work, or you're going to go to school and be somebody. You see what I'm saying? That's really what it is. When young Black people are under the belief that you're going to start this big old business and it's going to take off. And you're going to be this millionaire. Or you're going to marry rich. Or you see that now kind of with a lot of young people today. They believe they're going to marry rich, and it's like this, you see, so we spend so much of that time in the fantasy of rescue, in the fantasy. And I'm not saying that there isn't a reason for that. Right? We can talk about oppression. We can talk about the ways in which we grow up and so many of us are so unloved and undernourished and unsupported. You know what I mean? But when you get to a certain age, it's like, okay, listen, hey, right? Back to agency. I didn't get certain things. That's probably why I am where I am. And there's grief for that. We can take the time to grieve that. We can grieve the fact that, we were honor students and we didn't have, a mother, a father, somebody in our corner pushing us to go to college and filling out college applications and encouraging us in such a way. I wanted to be a writer. I was encouraged, hey, go off and be a doctor, be something. You're smart. You can do it. You know what I mean? I didn't have the self-belief. I wanted to pursue my dreams. That led to a road of 40K. I couldn't sit in my life and be mad when, I had friends who was in HR. They got their bins. They doing their thing. This is my journey. I knew what it was. You see what I'm saying? And so, yeah, I had to kind of realize this is my values, but I also had to realize, man, maybe I wanted a little bit more for myself, And I had to realize, okay, it's not too late for me. I'm going to do what I got to do, but I'm also going to be grateful for what I have, and I'm going to be appreciative and, all the things. And so I don't know, you guys, I just think at the end of the day, there's trade-offs. I think the more time we waste kind of like in certain spaces, then the harder it will be. I spent the earlier half of my 20s just healing. I was on the therapy wave very early. I remember 2018, I had dropped out of college. I met this guy who was a doctor. We were dating like very briefly. He was from like Ghana. And, he really inspired me. He inspired me. He was like, you smoke and, all these things, right? I was a stoner back in the day. And it just made me kind of want to get my life together, And in doing so, I started listening to like Miles Monroe and what's the other one? Zig Ziglar, right? Or Zig Ziglar. And just like positive messages. I started really getting like on a positive wave. I was reading like Oprah, watching Super Soul Sunday. You know what I mean? Listening to certain YouTube channels that would just have like voiceovers of like positive speaking. And so, and then I was writing and I just wanted to encourage other people who were also kind of lost and in that space, and maybe young people who were taking a chance on their dreams. And where I am now in my life, I don't have any regrets, because I'm integrated. I've grieved, I've healed, and I'm at a space in my life where I can take agency and be like, yeah, I did that. But I'm grateful that I did, because I knew that for me, writing was that important to where I didn't want to look up and say I never had pursued my dreams, right? And there are people I met who are very, they're professionals and highly career oriented, and they don't have hobbies. They've never pursued their dream, right? And so that's not to be comparative or look down on anybody. It's just to say that there are trade-offs. I was kind of kicking around, doing my thing, and inevitably there were some trade-offs, right? I wasn't making the type of money and doing the type of things, and so that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. It's a choice. I think about it all the time. I mean, sure, could it possibly be literacy with some people who go to the library just to kind of loiter? Possibly. But for many people, no. They're in there and they're on Facebook. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't judgment. It's just reality. You know what I mean? You could be in there busy. I want to learn something. I want to take a class. I want to learn something. They got free resources. I want to go to this class. I want to, you know what I mean? And a lot of people don't. They just don't. So I think it gets to a point where we have to start realizing that we have agency, right? What has been done to us is the thing that I like to teach about, right? Because I think it's important to know your history, right? But we're also living in a day and age where this is exactly what those who've come before us fought for, right? Do you know what civil rights was for? You know what I mean? We have a lot more agency than we did in the past. Right now, things are getting pretty crazy right now, right? We're entering a recession. We've got AI that's incredibly discriminatory, right, towards African-American people, from names to voices and to all the things alike, right? And that's another battle, right? That's why when we do this work, right, we talk about the plight of African-Americans. It's endless. It's endless, right? So if you join this work, it gives you a sense of purpose, And I don't know. I just think you kind of grow up and you just kind of start to realize, like, everybody's not going to be a millionaire, and it was never going to be that way. And you just kind of live your life, and you live your life with gratitude, and you take care of the things that you have, and, you be grateful for where you are, and you get up every day, regardless of where you work, and you do it with a sense of pride. You know what I mean? And you be grateful that you have stability in your life, especially today, right? Because there are a lot of people who are unemployed, right? More and more people are being pushed into this sort of like entrepreneurship through, some of these, apps and services, delivery services and things like that, So, yeah, yeah. And you got to be tenacious, regardless of what you want in your life. I was very tenacious in regards to healing and being a better person. Because you know what it was for me? I actually did believe I was going to be this famous writer. And I remember just studying the lives of famous people, right? And I would see how they would get all this money, amass all this fame and success and attention and admiration. And they were so incredibly unhappy. They would sabotage it. They were on drugs. And I remember telling myself, right, as delusional as I was, I said, I want to be in a place in my life where when I get there, I want to be so whole within myself that I can really enjoy my success, right? And that was my prayer. So who knows? We don't know what the future holds. It's not something that I'm kind of out of that, phase a little bit. But yeah, that was my prayer. And I stood on that. And so for me, I wasn't so heavily ambitious in terms of like pursuing something as much as I was on being a better person. And then, yes, I grew to be a better person and realized that because I had put so much effort, so much energy into my education, right? Buying all these books, doing all these readings and, investing in myself, that I was a little behind, in terms of, material success and all the things, but I'm still grateful because I made a way. It's enough. It's substantial for me. And I'm very proud. I think where I am right now is a good space, and it's good enough, but it's not like, I'm the corporate baddie who has, you know what I mean? And it's not to compare myself to that, but it's more so to say, hey, if I took a different path, it could look different, And I don't know. I just think there's something about settling into your 30s and, just settling into who you are, So there are people who are around you who absolutely inspire growth and change. And I'm not talking about somebody who inspires you materialistically, right? Because you got to, most things people are wearing today are probably fake anyway. Nobody can afford that stuff. I'm telling you this as someone who's financially literate, right? I've learned to be financially literate. That was something that was important to me. And most people can't afford this stuff. Even the people who think can afford it, like I'm telling you right now, they can't afford it. They're all these people who are traveling, they are disputing those charges. They're going toe to toe with credit card companies, so it's really interesting to think the ways in which we're influenced and how, stereotypically we think some people can afford it because they have it on, or, you see a white girl with a, designer bag, or Asian, and you think that these people got money and they're just as broke and in debt as you are right now. Discriminatory, they may have more access to credit lending, but nobody can afford this stuff, right? It was created with a very elite class in mind, right? The ultra wealthy, right? There's nothing normal about a working class person buying a $2,000 bag. You know what I mean? A $5,000 bag, a $3,000, like that's just insane, right? It was never created for working class people. And yes, it was a status symbol, and yes, it was, elitist in its own way, but that was the whole purpose, right? You reach a certain point in your life, you have more access, right? You want to be able to enjoy certain things. And so, it's sort of like meeting a need in terms of consumerism. Hey, listen, you reach a certain point in your life, these are the things you have access to, right? This is how, this is the new wave, right? Before it was Burlington, and now, it's Bloomingdale's, right? Like, that's just more so to show that, okay, you are progressing in society in such a way economically, and here are rewards for that, right? That's not to say, oh my God, you're unworthy, right? You're unworthy. No. That's just life, right? And it's business. It's American business, right? Which is the foundation of simply meeting needs. That's it. Creating a need, meeting a need. So I hope you guys got something from this. I hope that by me kind of creating this podcast and explaining this to you guys, that, you got something from this. And most importantly, I hope that you have somebody in your life who sees you, right? Who can see that you're a great mother, a great father, that you take care of your nieces and nephews, right? That you're a great partner, a great friend, and who can really see you. And I hope that in this, you'll take away the maturity to realize that, this obsession that we have with being admired in such a way is partly killing community, right? We are becoming more and more narcissistic, and we absolutely want to be worshipped, right? We want someone to be highly admirable of us, and, it's just not realistic. And so people appreciating you, cherishing you, seeing you, doesn't always look like admiration. And so I don't know if that's a human need or not, but I do think we are, we should be mindful of that. And I'm going to go. I hope you guys got something from this. It's been a while. I really enjoyed making this podcast. I haven't created anything for you guys for like 4 weeks now. So this was great. I'm going to go. Peace.